I'm Zara 29 years old, and I never thought the girl who once cleaned office buildings with her immigrant parents would one day own a tech company worth $15 million. Growing up in Queens, New York, with parents who spoke broken English and worked 3 jobs between them, success felt like something that happened to other people. But that was before I met Blake Whitmore, my college sweetheart whose family would one day make me question everything I'd built. Before I tell you how his mother's venomous words at a charity gala led me to completely restructure my life, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more stories about overcoming adversity and finding your worth. My parents, Carlos and Elena Castellanos, arrived from El Salvador when I was 4 years old with nothing but hope and an unshakable work ethic. Dad worked days at a construction site and nights cleaning office buildings. Mom took care of elderly clients during the day and cleaned houses on weekends. Our tiny one-bedroom apartment in Queens always smelled like disinfectant and the traditional pupusas Mom would make to sell to neighbors for extra income. I slept on a pull-out couch surrounded by cleaning supplies and the second-hand computers Dad would fix and resell. Despite their exhaustion, my parents never missed a school event. Dad would arrive at parent-teacher conferences still in his work boots, Mom clutching her English dictionary to help with translations. They didn't understand American culture completely, but they understood that education was my ticket to something better. Zara, work hard, be smart, Mom would say in her accented English. Make better life than us. I took those words to heart. While other kids played video games, I was at the public library teaching myself basic programming on their ancient computers. I discovered I had a natural aptitude for technology, understanding how systems worked in ways that seemed to elude my classmates. By middle school, I was fixing computers for teachers and helping a librarian update the school's outdated website. High school was where I first felt the sting of class differences. While my classmates got new iPhones every year, I carried a flip phone held together with electrical tape. My clothes came from thrift stores, carefully selected to look as normal as possible. I learned to be strategic about everything, eating free breakfast and lunch at school to save money at home, staying late in the computer lab because we didn't have internet at our apartment. But I was determined. I started a small business in my junior year, offering computer repair services to neighbors and local businesses. Working out of our apartment's tiny living room, I diagnosed problems, replaced parts ordered online, and charged just enough to undercut the big electronic stores while still making a profit. Mom would bring me coffee and worry about the strange devices taking over our space, but she could see I was building something. Mija, you are so smart with these machines, she'd say, watching me resurrect a laptop that someone thought was dead. Maybe one day you have big company. It seemed impossible then, but her faith planted a seed. Senior year brought scholarship opportunities I'd never dared to dream about. My computer science teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, helped me apply to programs specifically designed for first-generation college students. When I received a full scholarship to NYU's computer science program, my parents cried for an hour. Dad took the day off work, something he never did, just to celebrate at our kitchen table with a store-bought cake. NYU was culture shock on steroids. Walking into my freshman orientation, I felt like an alien observing a different species. Students casually discussed spring break trips to Europe while I was calculating whether I could afford the subway fare to get home for dinner. My roommate, Madison, was sweet but lived in a world where money was never a consideration. She'd order Seamless every night while I survived on ramen and whatever free food I could find at campus events. That's where I met Blake Whitmore during my sophomore year. I was at a computer science study group, helping classmates debug their code, when this tall guy with sandy brown hair and an easy smile approached me. You're Zara, right? I'm Blake. I've been watching you explain algorithms, and you're better than half our professors. Blake was everything I wasn't: confident, well-dressed, with the kind of easy charm that came from never having to worry about money. His family lived in the Upper East Side. His father was a prominent investment banker, and his mother was on the boards of several charities. He drove a BMW his parents had given him for his 18th birthday. I was instantly smitten and terrified. What could someone like Blake possibly see in me? Our first study session turned into coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into late-night conversations about technology and dreams. Blake was genuinely fascinated by my background and my drive. "You've accomplished more with less resources than anyone I know," he told me one evening as we walked through Central Park. That's incredible. I'd never had someone look at my struggles as strengths before. Meeting his family was inevitable but terrifying. The Whitmores lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, the kind of place I'd only seen in movies. Floor-to-ceiling windows, original artwork, furniture that cost more than my parents made in a year. Blake's mother, Victoria Whitmore, answered the door in what I later learned was a designer dress worth more than my semester's textbooks. "So you're the girl Blake's been telling us about," she said, her smile perfectly polished but somehow cold. "Computer science, how practical." Blake's father, Richard, was warmer but distracted, clearly more interested in checking his phone than meeting his son's girlfriend. Blake's sister, Amber, was polite but dismissive, the way rich kids often are with people they consider beneath their social circle. Dinner conversation revolved around topics I couldn't contribute to: their recent trip to the Hamptons, mutual friends from their country club, investments, and market trends. I sat quietly, trying to use the right fork and feeling increasingly out of place. "And what do your parents do, Zara?" Victoria asked during dessert, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer wouldn't impress her. "They work in service industries," I said carefully. "My father does construction and building maintenance. My mother provides elder care." "How nice," Victoria replied, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Hardworking people are the backbone of society." The condescension was subtle but unmistakable. Blake either didn't notice or chose to ignore it, but I felt it like a slap. Despite his family's lukewarm reception, Blake and I grew closer. He genuinely admired my work ethic and technical skills, often asking me to explain programming concepts or help him with projects. I, in turn, was drawn to his optimism and the way he saw possibilities where I saw obstacles. By junior year, we were inseparable. Blake would come to my parents' apartment for dinner, charming my mother with his attempts at Spanish and listening respectfully to my father's stories about construction work. My parents adored him, grateful that their daughter had found someone who treated her well. "He is a good boy," Mom would say after Blake left. "He sees your heart." If only his family could see what he saw. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science and a minor in business. More importantly, I graduated with a business plan. Throughout college, I'd been developing an idea for a platform that would help small businesses manage their digital presence, websites, social media, online reviews, customer communications, all integrated into one affordable system. While my classmates were interviewing for corporate jobs, I was preparing to launch my own company. I'd saved every penny from my campus tech support job, built a prototype of my platform, and identified my target market: small businesses owned by immigrants and first-generation Americans who understood the struggle of competing with bigger, more established companies. Blake supported my entrepreneurial dreams, even though his family expected him to join his father's investment firm after graduation. "You're going to revolutionize how small businesses compete online," he told me with genuine excitement. "I believe in you." That belief meant everything, especially when my first attempts at finding investors were met with polite rejections. Young Latina woman with no business connections? Most venture capitalists couldn't see past their biases to recognize the potential of my platform. So I bootstrapped. I moved back in with my parents, converted our living room into my office, and launched Connect Local with $5,000 in savings and sheer determination. My first clients were businesses in our neighborhood: the Dominican restaurant where Dad sometimes ate lunch, the Guatemalan market where Mom shopped, the Pakistani electronics repair shop where I'd learned advanced troubleshooting techniques. Blake had graduated and was working at his father's firm, but he spent every evening helping me with business strategy and financial projections. His business education complemented my technical skills perfectly. Together, we refined Connect Local's features and pricing structure, making it accessible to businesses that had never been able to afford professional digital marketing. "You're onto something revolutionary," Blake said one night as we reviewed user analytics showing dramatic increases in customer engagement for our clients. These businesses are seeing real growth. He was right. Within 6 months, Connect Local had 50 clients. Within a year, we had 200. Small businesses were not only signing up but referring other businesses, creating an organic growth pattern that exceeded my wildest projections. The platform worked because it addressed real problems. Many small business owners struggled with technology, couldn't afford multiple software subscriptions, and didn't have time to manage separate systems for their website, social media, and customer communications. Connect Local integrated everything into one user-friendly dashboard with customer support available in multiple languages. As the business grew, I hired my first employees, recent graduates who believed in the mission and were willing to work for equity and modest salaries. We moved from my parents' living room to a small office in Long Island City, then to a larger space in Manhattan as our client base expanded nationwide. Blake proposed on our 2-year dating anniversary at the same coffee shop where we'd had our first study session. "I want to build a life with the most brilliant, driven woman I've ever met," he said, getting down on one knee as tears streamed down my face. The engagement party at the Whitmore penthouse was a study in contrasts. Blake was radiant with joy, I was cautiously optimistic, and Victoria was performing the role of gracious hostess while clearly harboring reservations about her son's choice. "I suppose we should welcome you to the family," she said to me privately while Blake was accepting congratulations from relatives. "Though I hope you understand the expectations that come with the Whitmore name." I forced a smile. I'm focused on building a life with Blake based on our shared values. "Yes, well," she replied dismissively. "Hopefully you'll grow into the role." Our wedding was beautiful but complicated. My parents had insisted on contributing financially, despite their limited means. They'd saved for 2 years to help pay for the reception, wanting to show the Whitmores that we weren't charity cases. Victoria made several comments about the quaint ethnic touches in our ceremony, including the mariachi band my father had hired and the traditional blessing my grandmother had flown in from El Salvador to perform. Blake either didn't notice his mother's microaggressions or had learned to tune them out, but I felt every slight. The way she introduced me to her friends as Blake's wife, who owns a small computer business. The way she suggested I might want to think about starting a family soon since my business was keeping me so busy. The subtle but constant implication that I wasn't quite good enough for her son. After our honeymoon, Blake and I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, purchased with my business earnings and his savings. Blake had surprised me by leaving his father's investment firm to join Connect Local as chief operating officer. "I want to build something meaningful," he explained when I initially protested, worried about him giving up a secure corporate career. "What you're doing matters more than helping rich people get richer." His business acumen was exactly what Connect Local needed to scale. Blake implemented financial systems, hiring processes, and strategic planning that took us from a scrappy startup to a legitimate technology company. Within 3 years of our marriage, we had 150 employees and over 10,000 clients nationwide. More importantly, we were genuinely happy. Blake appreciated my drive and technical vision, while I valued his strategic thinking and people skills. We worked well together professionally and personally, building a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. The success of Connect Local opened doors I'd never imagined. I was invited to speak at technology conferences, featured in business magazines, and recognized as one of 30 under 30 entrepreneurs to watch. The girl who'd once felt invisible in her NYU classes was suddenly being asked for her opinions on digital transformation and small business empowerment. But with visibility came scrutiny, especially from the Whitmore family. Victoria's comments evolved from dismissive to backhanded compliments. "It's wonderful how Zara's little computer project has grown," she'd tell her friends at charity events. "Blake has been such a stabilizing influence on the business." I bit my tongue, knowing that Blake's contributions were valuable, but that Connect Local had been my vision and my creation. Victoria consistently attributed our success to Blake's involvement rather than my leadership, as though I couldn't possibly have built something significant on my own. The dynamic became more complicated as our financial situation improved. Connect Local's success allowed us to purchase a beautiful townhouse in Park Slope, take vacations to Europe, and live comfortably without financial stress. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about money. With financial security came the ability to help others. I established a scholarship program for first-generation college students studying computer science. I hired several employees from backgrounds similar to mine, creating opportunities for people who might otherwise struggle to break into the tech industry. Most personally meaningful, I was able to help my parents retire early, buying them a small house in Florida where they could finally rest after decades of exhausting work. Mija, look what you built. My father said the day we moved them into their new home, tears in his eyes as he surveyed the backyard where he could finally grow the vegetables he'd always dreamed of. You did this with your mind and your heart. But even as I celebrated these victories, Victoria's disapproval cast a shadow over family gatherings. Her criticism became more pointed as my success became harder to dismiss. It's interesting how some people prioritize career over family, she'd comment when Blake and I mentioned travel plans for a business conference. I always believed a woman's most important role was supporting her husband and creating a stable home. Blake would defend me, but gently, always trying to maintain family harmony rather than directly confronting his mother's outdated attitudes. Mom, Zara and I are building our life together, he'd say diplomatically. We support each other's goals. The tension reached a breaking point during the 4th year of our marriage when Connect Local achieved something I'd never dared to dream, a valuation of $15 million based on acquisition interest from 3 major technology companies. Suddenly, my little computer project was worth more than most people would earn in multiple lifetimes. The success brought opportunities but also pressure. Investors wanted to discuss expansion strategies, potential buyers were interested in acquisition terms, and business journalists wanted to tell the story of the immigrant daughter who'd built a tech empire from her parents' living room. Blake was incredibly proud. You've built something that's changing thousands of lives, he said the night we learned about the valuation. Small businesses across the country are thriving because of your platform. His pride meant everything to me, but I could see the strain that family dynamics were putting on him. Victoria's resentment was becoming harder to disguise, and family dinners were increasingly uncomfortable affairs where every conversation felt loaded with subtext. The situation exploded at the annual Whitmore Foundation Charity Gala, an event that raised money for educational initiatives. Victoria had insisted we attend, despite my growing reluctance to participate in family social functions. It's important for Blake's position in the family, she'd explained, making clear that my presence was expected rather than welcomed. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with hundreds of New York's social elite mingling among priceless artwork while discussing their charitable contributions. I wore a designer dress Blake had convinced me to buy, trying to look the part of a successful entrepreneur rather than feeling like an imposter among old money families. Victoria introduced me to her circle of friends with barely concealed condescension. This is Blake's wife, Zara. She owns a computer company that's become quite profitable recently. The way she said profitable made it sound vaguely distasteful, as though earning money through hard work was somehow less respectable than inheriting it. As the evening progressed, Victoria's champagne consumption increased, and her comments became less filtered. When someone asked about Connect Local's success, she laughed dismissively. Oh, it's one of those internet businesses. Blake keeps the company grounded with his business education, of course. Zara's very technical. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to compose myself before I said something I'd regret. But Victoria followed me, clearly intending to have a private conversation. I think it's time we had an honest discussion, she said, checking her lipstick in the ornate mirror while I tried to escape into a stall. About expectations and reality. I turned to face her, my heart pounding but my voice steady. What do you mean? I mean this charade has gone on long enough. Her mask of politeness finally slipped completely. You've had your fun playing businesswoman, but at some point Blake needs a real partner. Someone who understands society, who can be an asset to his future rather than a liability. The bathroom was empty except for us, crystal fixtures and marble surfaces providing an elegant backdrop for Victoria's ugly truth. Blake and I are building our future together, I said calmly, though my hands were shaking. Based on love and mutual respect. Victoria laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Love doesn't last, dear. Compatibility does. And you're not compatible with our world, no matter how much money your little computer games make. Connect Local employs 150 people and helps thousands of small businesses succeed, I replied, finding strength in stating facts. It's not a game. It's a fad, she snapped, her composure cracking completely. These internet businesses come and go, but breeding and education last forever. You can't buy class, Zara. You can't earn your way into belonging here. Her words hit like physical blows, each one designed to cut deep. But instead of crumbling, I felt a strange clarity wash over me. You're right, I said, my voice growing stronger. I can't buy my way into your world. And I don't want to. I've built something meaningful that creates value for real people. That's worth more than all the inherited money and social connections you're so proud of. Victoria's face flushed red. How dare you speak to me that way, you worthless little trash from Queens. You're nothing but a gold digger who trapped my son with your sob story about poverty and hard work. Blake deserves someone refined, educated, someone who can elevate him instead of dragging him down to your level. The bathroom door opened and Blake walked in, clearly having come looking for us. He'd heard enough to understand what was happening. Mom, what the hell are you doing? His voice was cold with fury I'd never heard before. Instead of backing down, Victoria doubled down. I'm telling your wife the truth about her place in this family. She's been useful for your little rebellion phase, Blake, but it's time to grow up and marry someone appropriate. Blake looked between us, processing the scene. Apologize to my wife right now. I will not apologize for stating facts, Victoria replied haughtily. She's worthless trash who doesn't belong in our world, and deep down you know it. The silence that followed was deafening. Blake's face went through a series of emotions, shock, hurt, anger, and finally something like resolution. We're leaving, he said to me, taking my arm gently. And we won't be back. As we walked toward the exit, Victoria called after us, her voice carrying across the bathroom and into the hallway beyond. Don't come crawling back when this little fantasy falls apart. You'll regret choosing her over your family. We left the gala immediately, riding home in stunned silence. It wasn't until we were in our own living room that the full impact of the evening hit me. Years of subtle put-downs and barely concealed hostility had finally erupted into open warfare, and there was no going back. I'm so sorry, Blake said, pulling me into his arms as tears finally came. I knew she disapproved, but I had no idea how cruel she could be. She's been cruel for years, I admitted. Just more subtly. He pulled back to look at me. Why didn't you tell me how bad it was? Because I knew you'd be torn between us, and that wasn't fair to you. She's your mother. She's wrong, he said firmly. About everything. You're the most remarkable person I know, and what you've built is extraordinary. I'm proud to be your husband and your business partner. That night we talked until dawn about the patterns we'd been tolerating, the toxic dynamics we'd been enabling, and what we wanted our future to look like. Blake was horrified to realize how much his mother's behavior had affected me and angry at himself for not setting firmer boundaries earlier. I've been trained my whole life to keep the peace, he admitted. But peace isn't worth your dignity or our happiness. Over the next few days, Blake attempted to salvage the family relationship. He called his father to explain what had happened and demand an apology from Victoria. Richard was sympathetic but ultimately unwilling to confront his wife's behavior directly. Your mother feels threatened by Zara's success, he explained to Blake during a tense phone conversation. She doesn't know how to process that someone from a different background has achieved so much. Then she needs to learn, Blake replied. Because I won't tolerate disrespect toward my wife anymore. Victoria's response was to double down rather than apologize. She called Blake to insist that I had seduced him away from his family and his real future. When he refused to continue the conversation, she resorted to emotional manipulation. I'm your mother, she sobbed over the phone. How can you choose some girl over the woman who gave you life? I'm choosing my wife over someone who can't treat her with basic human dignity, Blake answered before hanging up. The estrangement from his family was painful for Blake, but it was also liberating. Without the constant undercurrent of family tension, our relationship flourished. We threw ourselves into expanding Connect Local, launching new features, and exploring acquisition offers that could take the company to the next level. 6 months after the gala incident, we received an offer that changed everything. A major technology conglomerate wanted to acquire Connect Local for $23 million, with terms that would keep me as CEO of the subsidiary and allow us to expand internationally. "This is your vindication," Blake said as we reviewed the offer terms. "Everything you've built, everything you've proven, this validates all of it." The acquisition process was complex, involving lawyers, accountants, and months of due diligence. Throughout it all, Blake was my rock, handling negotiations while I focused on ensuring that our employees would be protected and that Connect Local's mission would remain intact. When the deal finally closed, I was 28 years old and worth more money than I'd ever dreamed possible. More importantly, I'd proven that the girl from Queens who'd fix computers in her parents' living room could build something that mattered on a global scale. The irony wasn't lost on me that Victoria had dismissed my business as a computer game worth nothing, while investors had valued it at almost $25 million. Blake's sister Amber reached out privately to congratulate us on the acquisition, having seen the news in business publications. "I always knew you were brilliant," she admitted during a coffee meeting. "I'm sorry for how Mom treated you." "I appreciate that," I told her honestly. "But the apology I need has to come from Victoria herself." Richard also called to acknowledge our success, though he stopped short of directly criticizing his wife's behavior. "I hope this success brings you both happiness," he said diplomatically. But Victoria remained silent, her pride apparently more important than her relationship with her son. With our newfound financial freedom, Blake and I made a decision that felt both practical and symbolic. We bought a house in Malibu, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was nothing like the stuffy elegance of the Whitmore penthouse, all glass and light and open spaces that felt like possibility. "This feels like us," Blake said as we stood on the deck watching the sunset on our first night in the new house. No pretense, no expectations except what we create. I established my foundation that year, providing scholarships and mentorship for immigrant students and first-generation Americans pursuing technology careers. The Castellanos Foundation became my way of ensuring that other kids like me would have opportunities I'd had to fight for. Blake left his family's social circles behind without a backward glance, finding fulfillment in work that mattered rather than maintaining appearances that had never felt authentic to him anyway. "I spent my whole life trying to be the son they wanted," he told me one evening as we worked on foundation strategy. "I'm happier being the man you inspire me to be." 2 years after Victoria's explosion at the charity gala, she finally reached out, not to apologize, but to ask for help. Richard's investments had taken a significant hit during a market downturn, and they were facing financial difficulties for the first time in their lives. "I know we haven't spoken," Victoria said when I answered her call, her voice strained with the effort of asking for help. "But Blake is still my son, and family should help family." I listened to her carefully worded request for a loan to save their penthouse from foreclosure, noting that she never acknowledged how she'd treated me or offered any apology for her behavior. "I'll need to discuss this with Blake," I told her neutrally. "Surely you can make this decision yourself," she replied, a hint of her old condescension creeping back. "You're the one with all the money now." Blake's reaction was immediate and clear. "She has never apologized to you, never acknowledged that she was wrong, never shown any real change in her attitude. Why would we reward that behavior?" But I surprised him with my response. Because sometimes being the bigger person means showing grace even when it's not deserved. We agreed to help with the financial crisis, but with conditions. Victoria would need to acknowledge publicly that she'd been wrong about me and our marriage. She would need to show genuine respect in all future interactions. And she would need to accept that Blake and I were building our own life on our own terms. The acknowledgement, when it came, was grudging but real. At a small family dinner, the first we'd attended in 2 years, Victoria stood up and addressed me directly. "I owe you an apology, Zara," she said, the words clearly difficult for her to say. I was wrong about you, about your business, and about your marriage to my son. You've built something remarkable, and Blake is lucky to have you as his partner. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Blake squeezed my hand under the table, pride evident in his eyes. Thank you, Mom, he said quietly. That means everything. Looking back now, I realized that Victoria's cruelty was actually a gift in disguise. It forced me to stop seeking validation from people who were determined to withhold it. It taught me that my worth wasn't determined by other people's acceptance, but by my own achievements and character. The girl who once cleaned offices with her parents now runs a technology company that empowers small businesses worldwide. I've created jobs, built wealth, and proven that success isn't limited by your background or family connections. More importantly, I've learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from people who can't see your value, even when walking away means leaving family relationships behind. If you're in a situation where you're constantly trying to prove your worth to people who've already decided you're not enough, remember this: their inability to see your value doesn't diminish your worth. Build the life you want. Surround yourself with people who celebrate your success rather than resenting it, and never apologize for achieving more than others expected. My journey from the daughter of cleaning lady to tech entrepreneur taught me that the most important approval you need is your own. Victoria Whitmore couldn't see past her prejudices to recognize what I'd built, but that says more about her limitations than mine. Success isn't about changing the minds of people who don't want to respect you. It's about building something meaningful and surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your achievements rather than diminishing them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever had to choose between family acceptance and self-respect? How did you handle relationships with people who couldn't celebrate your success? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found value in my story, please like and subscribe for more content about overcoming adversity and building success on your own terms. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop trying to prove yourself to people who've already decided you're not enough. Your future self will thank you for choosing dignity over drama and respect over family harmony that comes at the cost of your self-worth. 3 years have passed since that awkward family dinner where Victoria finally apologized, and our lives have transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The Castellanos Foundation has grown beyond my wildest dreams, providing scholarships to over 500 students and mentoring programs in 12 major cities. What started as my way of giving back has become a movement, connecting first-generation Americans and immigrants with opportunities in technology and entrepreneurship. Blake and I expanded our Malibu home to include a state-of-the-art office complex where we run both Connect Local and the Foundation. The property has become a retreat center where scholarship recipients can attend intensive coding boot camps and business development workshops. Watching young people who remind me of my teenage self discover their potential never gets old. You should see the applications we received this quarter, Blake said one morning as we reviewed Foundation statistics over coffee on our deck. A girl from Detroit who taught herself Python while working at her family's restaurant. A guy from Phoenix whose parents are farm workers, but he's designed an app to help migrant workers find fair employment. These are your people, Zara. He was right. Each scholarship recipient felt like a piece of my own story. Young people with enormous potential but limited resources, determined to build something better for themselves and their families. The relationship with the Whitmore family had settled into a cautious détente. Victoria kept her word about treating me with respect, though it clearly required ongoing effort on her part. She'd even attended the Foundation's annual gala the previous year, writing a substantial check and introducing me to her wealthy friends as Blake's brilliant wife, who's changing lives through technology education. Progress, even if it felt performative sometimes. Amber had become a genuine friend, often visiting our Malibu home with her own family. She'd married a teacher and chose a deliberately different path from her mother's social climbing, something that seemed to mystify Victoria but pleased Blake enormously. I love seeing Amber with her kids here, Blake mentioned one evening after his sister's family had spent the weekend with us. She's raising them to value character over status. That's the opposite of how we were raised. Richard had surprised us by taking a genuine interest in the Foundation's work. His business experience proved valuable as we scaled our operations, and he'd even started volunteering as a mentor for young entrepreneurs. The financial crisis that had forced Victoria to swallow her pride and ask for help had been a wake-up call for him about what really mattered. But the most significant change in our family dynamics came when Blake and I made a decision that shifted everything. We decided to start a family of our own. The conversation had been building for months. At 31, I felt ready to add parenthood to our already full lives. More importantly, I wanted to raise children who would grow up understanding both privilege and purpose, who would know that success comes with responsibility to help others. I want our kids to know where they come from, I told Blake as we discussed family planning. To understand that wealth is a tool for creating opportunities, not just accumulating status symbols. They'll know, he promised. They'll spend time with your parents, learn Spanish, understand what it means to work for everything you have. But they'll also grow up with advantages we didn't have, and we'll teach them to use those advantages responsibly. When I became pregnant with our first child, the news rippled through both families in different ways. My parents were overjoyed, immediately starting to plan how they would spoil their first grandchild. Dad began researching child development books in Spanish, wanting to share his heritage with the next generation. Mom started hand-sewing baby clothes with the same careful attention she'd once given to her cleaning work. Victoria's reaction was more complex. She was clearly pleased about becoming a grandmother, but I could see her calculating how this development might affect the family dynamics she was still learning to navigate. I hope you'll raise the child with an appreciation for culture and refinement, she said during one of our monthly family dinners, her tone walking the line between hopeful and presumptuous. We'll raise our child with an appreciation for hard work, kindness, and using their advantages to help others, I replied calmly. Culture and refinement will come naturally when those values are in place. Blake squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture that had become our private signal of solidarity. The pregnancy was smooth, but it gave me time to reflect on the journey that had brought us to this point. From the girl who'd slept on a pull-out couch surrounded by cleaning supplies to a woman preparing a nursery in a Malibu mansion, the transformation still felt surreal sometimes. More importantly, I thought about the values I wanted to pass on. I'd learned that success without purpose felt empty, that money without meaning was just numbers in a bank account. Our child would grow up with financial security I'd never had, but I was determined they would also understand the responsibility that came with privilege. Blake and I spent hours discussing how to raise children who would be grounded despite growing up wealthy. We decided on several principles. Our kids would earn their spending money through age-appropriate work, they would volunteer regularly with organizations that helped families like mine, and they would understand that the Foundation's mission was part of their legacy and responsibility. I don't want them to feel guilty about their advantages, Blake said as we painted the nursery. But I want them to feel responsible for using those advantages well. When Elena Sofia Whitmore Castellanos was born, named for my mother and my heritage, she was immediately the center of both families' universes. But watching the different ways our families interacted with her was illuminating. My parents approached grandparenthood with pure joy and hands-on involvement. Dad would spend hours talking to baby Elena in Spanish, singing traditional songs and telling her stories about our family's journey from El Salvador. Mom insisted on making all of Elena's baby food from scratch, the same careful attention to quality she'd brought to everything she'd ever done. Victoria was clearly delighted to be a grandmother, but her approach was more formal. Designer baby clothes, professional photography sessions, discussions about which private schools Elena should attend when she was old enough. Love expressed through planning and provision rather than presents. The contrast wasn't necessarily bad. Elena would benefit from having grandparents who offered different types of support. But it reinforced my determination to ensure she understood where true value came from. As Elena grew from infant to toddler, Blake and I found our rhythm as parents while continuing to grow our professional endeavors. Connect Local's acquisition had led to international expansion, with offices now in London, Toronto, and Mexico City. The platform was helping small businesses in dozens of countries compete in digital marketplaces, fulfilling my original vision on a scale I'd never imagined possible. The foundation had evolved too, expanding beyond scholarships to include startup incubators for immigrant entrepreneurs. We'd helped launch over 200 new businesses, creating jobs and economic opportunities in communities that traditionally struggled to access capital and resources. "You've built an ecosystem," Blake observed one evening as we reviewed the Foundation's annual report. "Not just a company or a charity, but a whole network of people helping each other succeed." He was right. Former scholarship recipients were now mentoring new applicants. Businesses we'd helped launch were hiring other program graduates. The Foundation had created a virtuous cycle of opportunity and advancement that was becoming self-sustaining. Victoria had gradually come to understand the scope of what we'd built, though I suspected she still didn't fully appreciate the intentionality behind it. During one family dinner, she mentioned to her friends that Blake and I were quite philanthropic, as though our work was a hobby rather than a core part of our mission. "It's not philanthropy," I corrected gently. "It's justice. Creating opportunities for people who have the talent and drive but lack the resources or connections. It's what someone did for me when they gave me that scholarship to NYU." The comment seemed to surprise her, as though she'd never considered that my success wasn't entirely self-made but had been enabled by others who believed in investing in potential. As Elena approached her second birthday, Blake and I made another decision that would further define our family's future. We decided to split our time between Malibu and New York, spending several months each year in the city where our journey had begun. The decision was partly practical. Many of our business and foundation operations were still based on the East Coast. But it was also symbolic. I wanted Elena to understand her roots, to see the Queen's apartment where her mother had started her first business, to meet the community that had shaped her parents' values. We purchased a brownstone in Brooklyn, not far from our first apartment as newlyweds. The house was elegant but not ostentatious, with space for a home office and guest rooms for visiting scholarship recipients and foundation participants. "This feels right," Blake said as we moved into the Brooklyn house. "Elena should grow up knowing both worlds, the success we've achieved and the community that made it possible." The proximity to my parents was wonderful. Elena could spend afternoons with her abuela learning to make pupusas and hearing stories about the old country. Dad had started a small garden in their Florida backyard and would FaceTime with Elena to show her how vegetables grew, planning for the day she'd be old enough to help him plant and harvest. Being back in New York also reconnected us with the energy that had fueled our early success. The city's immigrant communities, the startup ecosystem, the constant buzz of people building and creating, it reminded us why our work mattered. The Foundation's New York office became a hub for young entrepreneurs from all backgrounds. Elena would often come to work with us, playing in the child-proofed conference room while we met with scholarship recipients and program participants. I loved that her earliest memories would include being surrounded by people pursuing their dreams through hard work and determination. "She's going to grow up thinking this is normal," Blake laughed one afternoon as Elena toddled around the office, charming a group of young entrepreneurs who were presenting their business plans. "That all kids have parents who help people start companies and go to college." "Good," I replied. "That's exactly what I want her to think. That using your advantages to help others is just what you do." As Elena's vocabulary expanded, she began picking up words in both English and Spanish, switching between languages with the fluid ease of a truly bilingual child. She called my parents abuelo and abuela Victoria and Richard grandma and grandpa, and seemed to intuitively understand that different families had different traditions and expectations. Victoria was clearly enchanted with her granddaughter, though she occasionally made comments about ensuring Elena received proper cultural education alongside her bilingual upbringing. I took these comments as progress. At least she was acknowledging Elena's multicultural heritage rather than trying to diminish it. "I think Mom's actually proud of Elena's Spanish," Blake observed after one family dinner where Elena had counted to 10 in both languages for her grandparents. "She's just not sure how to express it without sounding condescending." The real test of our family dynamics came when Elena turned 3 and we threw her first major birthday party. We decided to celebrate at our Malibu home, inviting both families plus friends from our various professional and personal circles. The guest list reflected the life we'd built: scholarship recipients who'd become successful entrepreneurs, employees from Connect Local's early days, business partners from around the world, my parents' neighbors from their Florida retirement community, Blake's college friends who'd stayed in touch, and various members of both extended families. Victoria arrived dressed immaculately and bearing an elaborate gift, but I watched her navigate the diverse crowd with what appeared to be genuine curiosity rather than her old judgmental dismissiveness. She spent considerable time talking with one of our foundation mentors, a successful software engineer who'd immigrated from Nigeria, asking thoughtful questions about his journey and his perspective on American business culture. "Your mother-in-law is different than I expected," my father mentioned to me quietly during the party. "More interested in learning than I thought she would be." He was right. Victoria was making an effort, and while it sometimes felt forced, the effort itself represented significant growth from the woman who'd once called me worthless trash in a museum bathroom. The party was a success, but more importantly, it felt like a celebration of the life Blake and I had built together. Elena was surrounded by people who represented different aspects of our journey: family, business, philanthropy, friendship, all coming together to celebrate the next generation. As guests mingled on our deck overlooking the Pacific, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path that had brought us here. The struggles with Victoria had been painful, but they'd forced us to define our own values and build our own version of success. "Look at what you've created," Blake said, finding me on the deck as the party wound down. Elena was asleep in his arms, worn out from being the center of attention all day. Not just the business or the foundation, but this whole community of people who believe in the same things we do. He was right. The party had felt like a gathering of our chosen family, people who shared our values about hard work, opportunity, and using success to help others. It was the kind of community I'd dreamed of belonging to when I was young, and now I'd helped create it. That night, after all the guests had gone home and Elena was tucked into her bed, Blake and I sat on our deck reflecting on how far we'd traveled from our college study sessions. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of those early days?" I asked. "When it was just us against the world, trying to build something from nothing?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I love the complexity we've built. The foundation, the business, Elena, even the complicated relationship with my family, it all feels like we're living with purpose." I understood what he meant. Our life was more complex now, with responsibilities and relationships that required constant attention and care. But it was also richer, filled with meaning and impact that extended far beyond our personal happiness. As I write the story, Elena is now 4 years old, fluent in both English and Spanish, equally comfortable playing with her Fisher-Price laptop, pretending to work like mama, and helping her abuelo tend his garden over FaceTime. She attends a progressive preschool where diversity is celebrated and social responsibility is part of the curriculum. Blake and I are expecting our second child, a boy we plan to name Carlos Blake Whitmore Castellanos, honoring both my father and Blake's commitment to our shared future. Elena is excited about becoming a big sister and has already started planning how she'll teach her baby brother to speak Spanish. The foundation continues to grow, having awarded over 1,000 scholarships and helped launch more than 500 businesses. Connect Local was recently valued at over $40 million as we explore expansion into developing markets where small business support is desperately needed. Victoria and I have settled into a relationship that might best be described as respectful collaboration. She'll never be the warm, embracing mother-in-law I might have wished for, but she's become someone who treats me with dignity and seems genuinely invested in Elena's well-being. More importantly, she stopped trying to undermine my marriage or diminish my accomplishments. "I was wrong about many things," she told me recently during a private conversation while Elena played with her cousins at a family gathering. "I let my prejudices blind me to your character and your achievements. I'm grateful you didn't let my behavior destroy your marriage to my son." It was the closest thing to a genuine apology I'd ever received from her, and it felt like closure on a chapter of our relationship that had caused years of pain. Looking back on this journey, I realized that the most valuable lesson I learned wasn't about business or technology, or even family dynamics. It was about the importance of defining your own worth rather than letting others determine your value. Victoria's cruelty forced me to stop seeking approval from someone who was determined to withhold it. That painful lesson taught me to focus on the opinions of people whose judgment I respected: Blake, my parents, my mentors, my team, and eventually my children. Success isn't about changing the minds of people who've already decided you're not enough. It's about building something meaningful and surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your achievements rather than resenting them. For anyone reading this who feels trapped between someone else's expectations and their own dreams, remember that you have the power to choose which opinions matter. Build the life you want, create the impact you believe in, and never apologize for achieving more than others expected. The girl who once cleaned offices with her immigrant parents now runs companies that employ thousands and foundations that change lives. But more importantly, I'm raising children who understand that privilege comes with responsibility and that success is meaningless unless it's used to help others. That transformation didn't happen despite the obstacles I faced. It happened because of them. Every challenge forced me to become stronger. Every setback taught me resilience. And every person who doubted me motivated me to prove them wrong through my actions rather than my words. Your background doesn't determine your future. Your current circumstances don't define your potential. And other people's inability to see your worth doesn't diminish your value. Build something that matters, help others along the way, and never let anyone convince you that you don't belong in the rooms where decisions are made. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from people who can't appreciate what you bring to the table. Your future self will thank you for choosing dignity over drama, respect over false harmony, and purpose over other people's approval. The life you build will be worth more than any relationship that requires you to diminish yourself to maintain it.